I can't hear you now, by the way. If that's deliberate, then okay. It's deliberate. Okay.
Well, looks like we have everyone here, so we can start. So welcome to the Wisconsin. Oh, hold on. Sorry about that. We're back. Can you hear me? Good.
Yes, I can hear.
Welcome to the Wisconsin.net user group. We talk about, I lost words today. So we're going to have a presentation about modern.net and CMS. We have Zoltán here to talk about. I guess we'll just start it right up and welcome.
All right. Shall I start screen sharing?
Yes, please.
All right. Okay.
Sorry.
Yeah. So I wasn't entirely sure. So awesome. You should be able to see my screen. And if everything is all right on your end, then please just let me know when to start.
All right. We'll take that off, and we're ready to start when you are.
Awesome. Well, I'm great to be here with you. Hello, everyone. I'm Zoltán Lehóczky. And why I got in touch with you to give a talk about Orchard Core is because it can save you a lot of time. And, time is money, so that's always useful. And Orchard is something that's part of my personal developer journey as well. And so I'm always eager to share it with others. But let's get into it. I will show you kind of a CMS here, a content management system, a web content management system. Now, if you are not using a CMS already, then perhaps you are asking, okay, but why would I actually use something like that? I'm perfectly fine with ASP.NET Core in itself. Well, while .NET already, and of course ASP.NET, ASP.NET Core, and the various frameworks also provide you with a lot of features. CMS is kind of a complete package on top of that. So it contains developer level features, user level features, both for the admin area, both for the front end. So all in all, it prevents you from reinventing the wheel. It's also kind of a framework because when we are talking about the CMS, it's never just that you click around and you create a web app. It's always that you have the CMS, which is a foundation, but you build on top of that. You always write some code to extend that CMS. And well, to do that, it also needs to be some kind of framework, and it needs to provide some kind of pattern that you use to extend it. So it's always a framework that's a nice guideline when you are working on large applications. And of course, it's not just about the software. There's always some kind of community. When we are talking about an open source project, like Orchard that I will show you, there the community is the most important support that you can get. There are also CMSs out there with a company behind them. Then you can, of course, also get support from there. But the point is that you are not alone, and there's a specific niche where you can get help, which is sometimes a lot more useful than just shouting out into the big internet. And well, Orchard is a CMS and a framework. So let's take a look at it. How Orchard describes itself, or how we as a community decided that we should describe Orchard is, as you can see here. Let's dissect this tagline one by one. Open source, I guess everybody is familiar with it, so not much to discuss there. Orchard is also modular. Now, an Orchard application by default is a monolith. You can also create a microservices architecture with Orchard, by the way, but by default, it's a monolith. But within that monolith, it's modularized. So, of course, it's not just a single project. How you divide up your application and how Orchard itself is implemented is a modularized architecture with a lot of specific components that you can individually select to use or individually turn off. It's also multi-tenant. That means that from a single application, you can run any number of websites, web applications, and those will be seemingly completely independent. They will have different content, different configuration, they can have different users, but there will be a single application, a single code base behind the scenes. And that's very useful for site density and for efficient hosting, because that way you can have a huge number of sites hosted very simply. This is especially useful if you have, if you run a lot of websites for your clients that have largely overlapping functionality, or which are quite similar. Or you need a lot of mini sites, like for marketing campaigns, events, stuff like that. And Orchard is also a framework, not just a CMS, but the CMS functionalities that I will focus on here. And it's built up on top of ASP.NET Core. So Orchard in numbers, it targets .NET 6 and 7, both of them actually. Once .NET 8 comes out later this year, I guess usually in November, then it will also target that. It's built not on top of not just ASP.NET Core, but it follows the MVC paradigm actually. So ASP.NET Core MVC. By the way, while Orchard is built with MVC, you are free to use anything else in your own application utilizing Orchard. It's open source, as we have heard. It's under the umbrella of the .NET Foundation, actually. And it's a very active project with a small but very active community with thousands of commits, hundreds of contributors, and thousands of issues, most of which are actually closed. So it's not just that people are complaining and open issues, but these are being fixed when it comes to bugs or implemented when it comes to features as well. There's, by the way, also an Orchard 1, or previously called Orchard CMS, because Orchard Core didn't start with ASP.NET Core. Orchard Core technically started with ASP.NET Core, but Orchard as a project didn't. It goes back all the way to the legacy.NET framework, ASP.NET MVC proper. It was, I think, first unveiled in 2009. And that project still lives on, and its successor is Orchard Core. It was also a very active project at the time. It's still supported, so you might bump into legacy applications running on Orchard 1. But of course, if you are starting a new project, Orchard Core is the way to go. To give you a little bit of perspective, as mentioned, Orchard was first published in 2009 on Codeplex, which, if you may have not heard of, that was Microsoft's GitHub before Microsoft actually bought GitHub. In 2011 is when I started working with it. 3 years later, or 2 years later, actually, we started our company, and 2014 is when Orchard Core was first started. At that time, if you may remember, ASP.NET Core was very unstable, a lot of changes with every major version even. So Orchard Core was comparably unstable as well. But around 2019, it reached a production-ready state. And in 2021 is when we also said that, okay, now we should call it 1.0. By the way, I'm from a company called Lombic Technologies. As mentioned, we started in 2013, and we were born out of Orchard. We focused on Orchard right from the very beginning. And since then, we have pretty much seen it all, done it all. We have a team of 20 Orchard developers, the biggest openly available Orchard team in the world. And since then, we have worked with individual developers and SMEs, as well as companies like Microsoft itself, or Live Nation, or the Smithsonian Institution. Now, okay, probably you are sold on the idea of trying a CMS, and Orchard looks interesting, but why would you use it if you already know ASP.NET Core? Well, first of all, if you do know ASP.NET Core, or even ASP.NET Core MVC, that's still applicable. Everything you know is still applicable. Orchard doesn't substitute ASP.NET Core. It builds on top of it. It extends it. Even not just with user-level features, but even on the level of implementing ASP.NET Core interfaces like iString localizer or iHTTP context accessor. And it has a lot of features, some of which I will demo in a minute. For example, it's a CMS, so of course it has everything related to content management. It's a very flexible content model. And just as everything else in Orchard, the content model is also extensible from custom plugins. It has management for everything: user management, media management, audit trail, workflows, mentioned multi-tenancy, everything you can think of. And this is my personal story as well, that if you are relatively early in your career when it comes to being a developer, or if you are beginning with .NET, then it's, I think, very useful to join a large quality open source project like Orchard, because you can become a lot better developer just by reading the code, trying to understand it, trying to contribute to it, even if you just start small, because it's a huge project. You can learn a lot from just from the code. And not to mention, Orchard, apart from some very talented community members, is it's also developed by sometimes by people who are on the ASP.NET Core team too. So right from the source. And of course, there's the community as well. This is quite a tight-knit niche community, not a huge one, a pretty sizable one, but still not a huge one. So people are usually very helpful. You can take part in the day-to-day life of the project, and you can easily get help either on the community forums, or you can hire people to help you. And now, to give you a little bit of idea of what's possible with Orchard and who use Orchard, let me show you a couple of websites. These are both, most of them are Orchard Core, but there are also a couple Orchard One ones. Let's start with this one. It's not a very complicated website, but I figured that, well, you surely know the Transformers franchise, because, by the way, this is kind of like a mini site for a video game. I'm not really at the liberty of talking about the details of it, but the company that creates these also utilizes Orchard in a kind of platform way that they can roll out such applications very quickly. Secondly, Royal Veterinary College. It's a pretty important and venerable college in the UK. This site is also running on Orchard, and it has a lot of cats, so that's already a big plus. Oh, sorry. Let me hide the taskbar here, so we have a little bit more space. Now, the previous two were more like websites, but more involved web applications can be created with Orchard as well, of course. Fly Egypt is something that you would expect from a web application that drives traffic to an airline. So apart from the standard website features and content pages, you also have something like a booking system implanted here. House of Blues, a brand of Live Nation, is also using Orchard. And under the brand House of Blues, there are a lot of various event venues, restaurants, pubs. And those venues also have their own websites in a multi-tenant application. The city government of Santa Monica also uses Orchard. More and more, actually. So it started with a website, and slowly, pretty much every piece where citizens interact with the city on the web is going on to Orchard. The Smithsonian Institution probably doesn't need any introduction. Now, the Smithsonian Folkways Recordings Division, probably I should call it, of the Smithsonian uses Orchard as well. And this is a curious case because this website is Orchard Core, but from the parent division called Smithsonian Folk Live, there are actually two other websites that are linked on the top here, and do still run on Orchard 1. Perhaps we'll be able to help them migrate over these as well, because this is something that we have migrated over from Orchard 1. And finally, also state governments, not just federal and municipal governments, use Orchard because, well, the Employment Security Department of Washington State uses Orchard for this site as well. And if you are interested in more examples of Orchard, check out showorchard.com. This is a gallery of Orchard Core websites, applications, other platforms that we think are useful to show. So you can check out what others do with Orchard and check out other teams working with Orchard. All right, so that was a little bit of teaser until now, but we haven't actually played with Orchard yet. So let me now switch over to a demo and show you how the whole thing works in action when you are working with Orchard as a developer. So I'm now switching over to Visual Studio, and what we have here is a very simple Orchard Core application. Well, I use the term Orchard Core application, but it's actually an ASP.NET Core application that has two Orchard packages. If I open the CS proj of this root web project, you see that, well, we have these two Orchard Core packages here, and that's pretty much it. So I created an ASP.NET Core web app. You see it uses the web SDK and added two Orchard Core packages to it. From now on, Orchard drives the front end of the application as well as the admin area, and we can start extending it. I will also show you some examples of how to extend Orchard, but for now, let me start this application with Control F5, and let's see it in action. So we'll see the Orchard setup screen. When there's no existing application yet, that's where the whole story starts. Is this also legible from the back there?
That's better. Yes. Sorry, we were muted.
Okay. So let me know if it's still hard to read.
No, it's good.
Okay, great. So here's the setup screen. By the way, it's also localized, just as everything can be localized in Orchard, both the content and both the UI labels. You start with the name of the site, so we can call it demo, I think. And by the way, almost everything here can be changed later too. And then we need to select a recipe. Now, a recipe is basically a JSON file that can contain content and configuration of an Orchard application. So it's a way to kind of create templates of Orchard's setups. And you can also use recipes to move content between two Orchard applications. So you can do what we call content deployment. You can export content and configuration from one application and import it on another one. But on the setup screen, we have some built-in Orchard recipes that provide some kind of template for simpler websites. The first one, agency, is for something like a small company website, and the blog is, well, for a blog. I will use the blog one, but by the way, there's also this headless site recipe. Probably you are familiar with the term headless or headless CMS. Orchard uses three models of, let's call it operations, not quite hosting. What I will show you here will be what we call the traditional CMS, when Orchard provides an admin area and it also drives the front end. There's also something that we call the decoupled CMS. In that way, we still have one application and Orchard still drives the admin area, but on the front end, you write your code from scratch. So, for example, you implement something like Razor pages or a vanilla ASP.NET Core front end, ASP.NET Core, ASP.NET Core MVC front end, and you just use some code APIs of Orchard Core to fetch content from the database, for example. And then there's headless. In the headless approach, you have two completely separate applications. Orchard's is one application, and it still drives the admin area. And the other application is something independent of the Orchard app that fetches content from the Orchard application via its web APIs. And this front-end app can be a different web app or even something like a mobile application. But for now, I will use the blog one. Orchard, of course, also manages time zones. And then you can also select the database engine to use. For local development, we recommend SQLite because, it's just a simple file. You don't need to set up anything. It just works. For production sites, we recommend either SQL Server or MySQL, MariaDB, or Postgres that have built-in support as well. So for now, I will use SQLite. And finally, we need to set up the default admin user. So I will do that. I will use the very secret, very safe password 1 exclamation mark, if I manage to type it in, password, which is, of course, something that you should never use in production. But locally, we use it as a convention because, well, it's simple. So the setup already ran. It created the database, created tables, and in the database imported the recipe, configured everything, and now we have our block here, which is, well, a simple block. So we have some basics of a block here. If we scroll down, there's also a single blog post. We can also open it. There's some text, metadata, body of the blog, and at the bottom there's also some categorization and tagging. We also have a menu with an about page as well, which is a simple static content page. All right, now let's actually check out how the whole thing looks from the admin. So I will log in here. And this is how the admin looks like. By the way, it's also responsive. It's also very responsible to drive the whole admin experience, but otherwise it's responsive. You can also use it on tiny screens, even if you like. And if you check out the menu here, we'll be able to see our blog with our single blog post in all its glory. And if you check it out, we'll see a content editor, and the usual stuff that you'd probably expect. Like a blog post has a title, it also has a permalink, and it has a body which is using Markdown, by the way. So Markdown is also supported out of the box by Orchard, and then the rest of the stuff of a blog post. Now, if we go to here to the content menu and content items, we'll also see the other content items in the system, chiefly this about page that we also checked out. And it also has a title, it also has a permalink, and it also has a body, but this time this is called HTML body. This is a different kind of body text. It's not Markdown, but it's direct HTML code with a WYSIWYG editor. And now I would like you to notice something. Perhaps you already noticed it. Sorry about that. That the title and permalink in both of these cases look very similar, right? Well, they are not just similar, they are actually the same thing. They are the same piece of functionality, the same piece of code. And let me introduce a little bit of Orchard terminology here. What we are looking at here are content items, how we call them in Orchard. A blog post is a content item, and an article is a content item. And the blueprint of these content items are called content types. So that's kind of the content definition, the schema. You can also think about it as a content type is like a class. So we would have a content type called blog post and a content type called article. And when we kind of instantiate those classes, when we have objects, then one specific blog post is a content item and one specific article is also a content item. And the content types are flexible collections of building blocks. And one of the most fundamental building block here is a content part. The titles here are all driven by the same content part called title part. I know, shocking, right? There's also this permalink, which is also driven by the same content part for both of these content types. And you may have guessed it, it's permalink part. No, it's not called permalink part. Actually, it's called outer out part. And this is what makes the content model here very useful, very generic, and very flexible. You can change these content types. If you want to add a subtitle to a blog post, then you can also add a content part or something like that for it. Actually, a subtitle is already here, so you don't need to do that. But if you don't want the subtitle, for example, you can also remove it. These things can be all mixed and matched. You can also add your own content parts. So if something is not built into Orchard that you need, you can develop your own content part. We'll also take a brief look at that. But before going into the code, another example of some built-in functionality. Here in the content list, we can also create new content items. And there's also another content type called page, which is a little bit like an article. It's a static content page for it's static content for a single page, but it doesn't have a body, an HTML body, but this thing here, which is called a flow part, a flow editor. And here you can add widgets. Like, for example, you can add a row HTML widget, which is exactly that. You add some HTML here. Oops. Now, what's cool, by the way, here, there's also a live preview feature. Let me put this side by side. Now, if you check out the right-hand side, it changes while I'm typing. So you can see the content editing happen on the front end live as well. And then you can publish the page. And at that point, if you open it, then it will look like just in the preview. By the way, you may have noticed that I clicked the publish button here, but there's also a save draft. Orchard also has versioning built in and drafts, the draft capabilities. Drafting works exactly how you would perhaps expect it. For example, if I add some change here and save a draft, then while I'm refreshing on the right-hand side, you see that nothing changes. Of course, nothing changes because I only saved the draft. But if I go back here and hit publish, then on the right side, it also changes because now it is out in the public. I also mentioned versioning, but I didn't quite show you that yet. But for that, perhaps a useful thing to know about would be audit trail, because Orchard also has an audit trail feature. I very briefly mentioned it in the very beginning as well. And this is also an example of Orchard's extensibility. If we go to this features menu here, we see all the built-in features of Orchard that can be individually disabled or enabled. It's a very long list, by the way, but don't worry, this is also documented. And all of these features here are something that you can also implement. So they come with Orchard. You don't have to use them, but you may use them. But how they are implemented, their code, is something that you can also write. You can extend Orchard in very similar ways. So while the audit trail module is a pretty big and pretty important module, and it's something that Orchard provides out of the box, exactly these things you could implement as well. I enabled the audit trail, and now here under settings, we have the audit trail configuration as well. I'm just coming here to enable event recording for pages, because what the audit trail does is that it records events for everything happening in the system. If you want to know who changed what content, what configuration, the audit trail will be able to tell you. And I enabled it so we can check it out on the example of our demo page. So I hit publish here again. Since I just enabled audit trail, this will be the first version that will be visible in audit trail. And now if I change the title, for example, and I change the text again and hit publish, then we'll be able to see this in the audit trail as well. You see, now in the audit trail, we have the two versions. The first version is with the old title. The second one is the new title. And if you open the details, we'll even be able to see a diff view. So some metadata changed, but here's the title that we changed. You see the change word is there. And if you scroll down, we also see the change of that widget. Speaking of which, the widget, I think there's one thing pretty annoying here. This is a raw HTML widget where we write HTML directly. That's not something that an ordinary user would do. Let's change this. Let's add a WYSIWYG editor here as well, just as we have seen on the examples of the blog post and the article. And we can do that by changing the content definition, the content type of this row HTML widget, because when you add widgets here, these are also content items. And the row HTML widget is called row HTML widget because its content type is called row HTML. So let's go to content types. And here we have a row HTML content type. And this is the editor of a content type. This is the content definition, the complete configuration of a content type. There's some metadata that you can edit here. And if you scroll down, you will see a section for content parts and content fields. I mentioned content parts before, that content parts are the basic building blocks of such content types. There are also fields. These are smaller building blocks, also a little bit simpler. And the point is that it's another kind of building block. And these building blocks, also content fields, we can configure too. So for the HTML field, we also have some settings, including the ability to select what kind of editor we want to use. We can use a proper code editor like Monaco, but I will opt with the VCVig editor here. And now if we go back to our page, we'll see that we have now a beautiful VCVig editor for our row HTML widget. Well, it's not that row now. We should probably rename it to nice HTML widget or something like that. But this was a simple configuration change. You can also create your own content types from the admin. You can create your own content types from code. You can do the same with content parts and content fields. You can change existing content types that the recipe, like the blog recipe, provides, because the page and the row HTML widget, these are all provided by the blog recipe. But you can also change those also from the admin and also from code. Of course, apart from textual content management, Orchard also provides a media library feature for media management. Not much to explain there. You can upload and manage files and then insert or relate it to content items. You can also manage menus here, so that main menu we have seen at the top of the site. This is also something that can be managed from the admin. And by the way, a menu is a content item as well. So that's also something that you can customize. And you may notice that, again, we have our title here. Orchard also has user management, of course. By default, it provides local user accounts and role-based access control. But as everything, and I will sound like a broken record here, it is extensible and customizable. So these are built-in features, but you can create your own roles. You can edit a role and customize which permissions users with that role have. You can create your own user story implementation, so you don't necessarily need to use local users. By default, there's a local login, but you can use social login. You can use Active Directory login, everything else. There's also search. It's not enabled by default, just something that we call queries. But if we go back to configuration and recipes, we'll notice that we have something to do with recipes here again. And recipes can't just be used during setup. As I mentioned during the setup screen, they can also be used to move content and configuration between existing apps. And thirdly, you can also include recipes in your codes, in your application, and they will show up here. And with these recipes, you can provide a very easy way for users to run something, to automate something, to create content, to change configuration. For example, to set up search. So I'm running the Leucine search recipe here. By the way, you may notice that there's also Elasticsearch. For local development and for simpler applications, Orchard provides Lucene, but that will have the indices in local flat files, which is not good if you want to have a stateless web server with horizontal scaling capabilities. Now, for those kind of scenarios, Orchard also has support for Elasticsearch. So with that approach, you externalize search and indexing to a completely different server, to an Elasticsearch instance. And now, if we go back to search, we have a lot more menu items here, including an index called search. So if we go back to the front end of the site, we will, under /search, we will be able to see a simple search UI. And if we search for something like exploration, we also have hits. Well, we only have a single blog post here, so probably search is not that useful, but you get the idea. There's also quite a cool feature that's built into Orchard called workflows. Workflows is kind of visual programming. You don't need to utilize workflows because you can always achieve the same thing from code, but it's quite a cool feature that you can use to customize and programmatically do a lot of things in Orchard just from the admin. How workflows works is that we get a canvas here, and onto this canvas, we can add a starting event. The workflow also always starts with some kind of event. There are a couple of events built in, but just as anything, this is also extensible. You can also create your own events. And for example, there's a content published event that will run when the selected contents when items of the selected content types are published. So, for example, let's select page here. And I'm also making this the start event. And then you can add tasks. That is something that will be executed. And there are a lot of tasks here for everything that you need in day-to-day. There's a simple notify tasks. I would use that now to display some kind of message to the user. But you can also log to the Orchard application log. And there are also more involved things like for loops or if-else conditions. So again, like visual programming. Let me use the notify task here, and I will display this message here. Thank you, then user.identity.name. And this might ring a bell because user.identity.name is ASP.NET Core identity directly. And why this works, and why you have these brackets here, is because this is a Liquid compatible piece of text here. Orchard uses Liquid, the templating language invented by Shopify, to provide such dynamic text capabilities, and also for templating, by the way. So if I save this, now we can connect these two, and this is a full workflow. Of course, this is a very simple workflow. As mentioned, you can have a lot more tasks, also loops, conditions, but you get the idea. And there are also a lot more events, a lot of tasks that you can do. You can send out emails, you can call webhooks, all kinds of things. And now if you go back to the demo page and I hit publish again, you see that we have our awesome notification available here. So a quick way to customize behavior of an Orchard Core application. Now, a lot of things that we have clicked around. Let's go back to Visual Studio and write a little bit of code. I mentioned that we have our solution generated here. By the way, I generated this from the CLI code generation templates. And apart from the web project, we also have a module project and a theme project here. I've shown you modules. Modules are kind of plugins. We call them extensions in Orchard that provide some piece of new functionality. Themes are the other kind of extensions. They provide look and feel. Like most of your CSS, JavaScript, and HTML would go into a template, into a theme, including your templates, which templates can be liquid or razor. I actually have a liquid template here, which again comes from the code generation features, not much. And as you can see, it's a very basic HTML document with some Orchard-specific stuff. Now, let's try to enable our theme, and let's see what happens. So let me go back to the application, and here under the design menu, we have this themes feature. Orchard has a couple of built-in themes, like for the mentioned agency recipe, there's also a separate theme. But what's important for us is that our theme is also here, Orchard Core.demo theme. So I will make it current. And now let's go back to the front end and let's see how it looks. And it looks really ugly. There's no styling. There's no styling because, of course, our theme doesn't contain anything. It contains a simple and a single template. So not too pretty. We won't have time to make it pretty, but let me do at least something here. So let me go to the layout here and write hello. Of course, hello, because that's the first thing we as software developers write into any file, any editor, any demo. And you see that the hello message appeared here after a refresh. So we have just created our first Orchard Core theme. And now, of course, this wasn't a really spectacular result, but a theme is the Orchard Core extension, the kind of Orchard Core extension that you would usually start with, because, you know, it's always important to customize the look and feel of your application. Even if you don't need any complex feature, you will always need some kind of custom theme. And developing it is as simple as that. Write the code, refresh, it's there. If you use browser link or browser sync, you don't even need to do a refresh manually, of course. Now, perhaps if you are hardcore developers, then then Liquid's code is not what you usually write or not what you want to write, but rather C#. So let's take a look at some C# code too. I won't do the typing here because that would be very boring and very laborious, but let me show you very quickly the Orchard Core solution. So the solution of Orchard Core itself. And let's take a quick look at what's in here. As you can see, there are more than 200 projects. It's a pretty big solution. So we won't go through all of these, but I will show you how the title works. And by the way, this solution is so big that it's also used for performance testing and benchmarking of MS Build and Roslyn, because, well, a lot of code is here. And the title part is actually implemented here. Here it is, it's in all of its glory. That's the title part. It's a class called title part. And you see it, a title part only needs to manage a title. So the only thing that the title part needs to store is just the title as well. This is a simple content part, but there are also more complex ones. You can have a complex object, a complex class here if you need to store more stuff. But of course, this is not the only thing. When we edited the title here, if I go back to, for example, again, our demo page, if we edit the title here, this needs some kind of editor template. And if we go to the code base of title part, we'll also see that there's an editor for it here. Oh, let me actually make this window bigger. And this is the whole editor of title part. It's basically a label and an input field. And you may notice that there's no form. Of course, there's no form because the title part is just one piece of the whole picture. It's a part. So when you are implementing a content part, you are implementing a reusable, self-contained piece of functionality for content management. You don't have to implement everything. You just implement you just have to implement what specifically you need. In case, like an editor for managing titles. There's also some plumbing needed to make the whole thing work, because all of these content parts need to be self-contained without things like their own controllers. Because, well, we are not building a whole editor form, we are just building the editor of the title part. And by the way, I recommend, if you would like to start with Orchard, I also recommend you to check out the Orchard Core source code, a lot of examples there. And once you have something, you also have to host it somewhere. The good news is that Orchard is cross-platform. It can run anywhere where .NET runs. If you prefer IaaS or IaaS in the cloud, like with Azure App Services, that's suitable. But Orchard Core apps can be also containerized, so Docker is an option too. Or if you don't want to write C# code, but you just want to click together an application from the admin and perhaps write some theming with Liquid, then you can also try out our SaaS called .nest. There you just click, and get an Orchard Core application. It's, by the way, a multi-tenant application, so you get a tenant in there. Now, if you like this, and I really hope you did, here are some further reading resources. The official website is, of course, always a good start. You can also find the documentation there. Our Orchard Dojo website is all about Orchard learning and Orchard news. So you can find our weekly newsletter there, or the Dojo course tutorial series. Now, that's a video tutorial series, but if you prefer to learn from code, then check out our training demo module. The training demo module is an Orchard module that guides you from zero to hero to become an Orchard Core developer, all in code with a lot of commands. That's something that I would have loved in the beginning, but you can have it now. And a very time-sensitive offer, Orchard Harvest Conference. On the 31st, in 2 weeks, we'll have our first online Orchard conference. So if you like to get into the middle of the community, see what's going on, learn about Orchard, go there, sign up, it's free, and you will be able to take part from your chair. So that was it. Thank you very much. If you have any further questions, I would be glad to help you if you just write me an email. But I think we also have time for questions now.
Good job. This is a really good talk. If you would like to put any questions in your chat, we can address them. Or do we have any questions in the room here at all? I can't see everybody, but we'll bring them over here. If we have any questions, unless someone else does, well, that's about it. Thank you.
Well, yes, then it was either really clear or really unclear, as they say. But thank you very much for having me. I hope this was useful.